So today we have the NIH policy team here with us. We have Sonia, Catherine, and Shuba, and they're gonna give a presentation, and then we'll have some time for questions, answers at the end. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it over to them.
Thank you. And if we can bring up the slides, that would be great. My name is Catherine Blazinski. I am the policy director here at the All of Us Research Program. And I'm going to introduce the folks here with us today. So next slide. So yeah, we've brought actually kind of a team of us here. So I'll get us started and again sort of introduce my team as well as what we do and how we sit within the fabric of the program. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Ms. Sonia Juma and Dr. Subhashini Chandrasekaran, who function as our deputy director and our LC team lead, respectively. Next slide, please. But I often find it's helpful to talk about what policy is first. And if you don't mind just sequencing through these, there's some animations on this slide, so let's just bring all of those up. So policy is a definite course or method of action to select from alternatives and in light of given conditions to guide and determine present and future decisions or high-level overall plan, embracing the general goals and acceptable procedures, especially of a governmental body. So basically, it's the folks that set the rules and interpret the rules and provide a framework for implementation. And that's really what we do in the policy office. Next slide. So among other things, we do a lot of considering, so studying what things might mean and how they might fit together and what those implications are for the program. We interpret the laws and regulations and the policies that impact the program and guide the program's compliance with those, as well as sort of looking at the ethical environment in which the program exists and construct ethical frameworks for appropriate operation. We also establish, promulgate, and oversee program-wide policies and principles. And within that, we have 4 general topical areas that we handle in the policy office. There's, of course, operations to make sure that we continue to run smoothly and fit with all the work that's being done elsewhere in the program. We have a technical branch that deals with issues around data acquisition, curation, and also information stewardship and research, the resource access and use of those resources, as well as privacy. And so that's what we'll be focusing on predominantly today. However, we also will touch on LC, so ethical, legal, and social implications. And our LC branch, headed up by our LC lead, Shubha Chandrasekaran. She will be covering some of our LC governance stuff, and the return of information is also sort of housed in LC, and our LC scholarship. And then we also have a legal and regulatory branch that does a variety of other things, including special and protected participant classes, our agreements work, legal and regulatory stuff, and also our legislative analysis and covering genomics. Next slide, please. And here I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Sonia Juma to take us through the first part of our presentation today.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, so as you know, today we are going to focus on writing meaningful workspace descriptions. So we can move on to the next slide. You're probably wondering why we chose to focus an entire presentation on this topic, and that's because we think it's really important. And also because we have noticed that a lot of the workspace descriptions that we've seen are not comporting with our expectations. And so we really wanted to emphasize what those expectations are today and also why we have them in place. And so why is a research workspace description important? First is for transparency. Hopefully you know, but all of the descriptions you put together are posted publicly on researchallofus.org in our research projects directory. This way, anyone can see the research being carried out with data from our participants, any member of the public, all of our participants. One of our program's core values is that transparency earns trust. And so we are really channeling that here. We want participants to be able to look at the research that is being done with their data and how it's contributing to the field of biomedical research. Another reason is to keep data users accountable. We have our Resource Access Board is our oversight body that assesses compliance with our data user code of conduct. One way One tool they use to audit and review workspaces is the workspace descriptions. And so that is one of the first things they review when they are looking at a workspace. Another thing to note is that anyone can flag workspaces of concern to be routed to the RAB for review. So if you don't mind clicking, Melissa, you'll see that anytime you go to expand the research project's description, at the bottom of each one, there's this button that says request a review of this research project. So again, if someone finds something concerning, maybe they think that a project might be stigmatizing of a group, they can flag it. It takes them to a form. They can fill out a form for what their concerns are, and this gets routed to the RAB to review and follow up if the RAB agrees that there are concerning aspects to the project. And lastly, we require it of you. When you sign the Data User Code of Conduct, you agree to provide a meaningful and accurate description of your research purpose. And so that is part of your responsibilities as a Workbench user. Something else that I can note that goes also towards the transparency aspect is that in the 21st Century Cures Act, which authorized the creation of our program, it also noted that there should be information posted publicly on who's accessing data and what they are doing with it. And so our research projects directory accomplishes that goal for us too. Next slide. Okay, so now we'll go into talking about what your workspace description should actually include. The next slide here. And I'm going to start with titles. First thing to remember, again, that your workspace descriptions are posted publicly, and this includes your titles. These are not just for your personal use or for the use with your study group. They are publicly posted, and you should treat them as such. Think about how you might title presentation or like a paper, for example, and your title should really go towards describing the project that you're doing. So here I went through the research projects directory and tried to curate some examples of titles that work and titles that need some work. I will tell you it was a lot easier to compile the not okay section of this. So please, we ask that you pay attention to your titles and work on making sure that they reflect the work that's being done in your workspace. Next slide. Okay, and then these are the other components that we consider essential pieces of a workspace description, and we'll be going through them one by one. Next slide. Okay, so first is your background information. This should provide the foundation for why you are doing your study, including the rationale for your study and any context that's important. This should be based on reliable, accurate, and rigorous sources. Often in the background, it's helpful to provide information about findings already established in the literature or work that you've previously done that you are hoping to build upon. Next, we also ask that you clearly articulate your hypothesis within your project description. It should be easy to identify. It should give a proposed explanation or answer to your research question, and it should logically follow from your background information. Next slide. You'll see here that Kate has come up with some great examples of an okay hypothesis and a not okay hypothesis. So the first one says, based on the foundational evidence, we hypothesize that unicorns that have bad reactions to gluten prior to a diagnosis of celiac disease will be less likely to express a fondness for cake. Great, it points to that foundational evidence, and there's a clear line of cause and effect there. Less good, unicorns that don't like cake may feel this way because of bad reactions to gluten earlier in life that would eventually become celiac disease. Hopefully you can see some of the issues in that one. Next slide. Okay, and then populations of interest. You've probably noticed that in the workspace description form, we do have a section where we ask you to note if you are focusing on groups that have been historically underrepresented in research, and you'll check them off if you are focusing on any of those groups. However, it's also important that you give us details about your population of interest within some of the text fields of your workspace description. And of course, your population of interest should make sense given your research question and hypothesis, and you should err on the side of meaningful inclusion. You should have a reason if you are excluding any populations from your analysis. Of course, sometimes you're going to want to focus on particular populations, such as when there's a known health disparity that you're including, that you're exploring, and of course, something like that is fine. As you know, again, our research population is very diverse. We do include a lot of groups that have been historically underrepresented in research and who have also been historically subject to harms from research. And so one thing we also ask is that you detail the sociocultural considerations for your study around group and community benefit and harms, and include information about steps you're taking to address these considerations. This will help go a ways towards, allaying concerns about potentially stigmatizing research. And now I will pass it on to Shubha.
Thank you, Sonia and Kate. Picking up where we left off, the next part is in writing your workspace description. It is extremely important for you to have specific aims. These should be both concrete and achievable. They should address your hypothesis, or they should flow from the hypothesis that you have articulated. And the aims should describe the data that you plan to analyze so that it is, again, something we can see that is clear, understandable, and meaningful as you're required both by the Data User Code of Conduct to provide a meaningful explanation for why you are doing this research, and also for the reasons of transparency and accountability that Sonia mentioned. Next slide, please. Next come the methods. And following through on the same sort of notion of writing meaningful descriptions, it is very important that the methods be appropriate for your research question and the data that you plan to analyze. You will have to describe your methods in enough detail for a reader or for a member of the RAB to evaluate these criteria. This does require striking some sort of balance. Sometimes as you know, you are required to write your workspace descriptions in an accessible and plain language, and it might be challenging to provide all the methodological details without getting too technical or engaging the use of too much jargon. However, here we will ask you to use your discretion in making sure that the most important aspects of your methods, such as methods you might use for statistical analysis, the types of correlations, etc., that you would make, that are important for us to actually really understand what you plan to do and how you do it, are included within the description. We request that you take and describe steps you plan to take to prevent your research from resulting in stigma or discrimination. As Sonia just mentioned, many of the questions that you might study are with groups and communities that have been underrepresented in research, and many of those groups and communities may have also experienced stigma or discrimination, either systemic or other, which resulted in both in health disparities or other sorts of inequities that we see in healthcare and healthcare outcomes. And we request that you think carefully about those issues as you describe your methods so that you are not in any way promoting or propagating stigma or discrimination for such groups and communities. Next slide, please. The last field that you will be sort of required to fill out in your workspace description is describing your expected outcomes. And so again, I would say here that it flows from the other pieces of the workspace description that you would have already written. The expected outcomes or your anticipated findings should be bounded by logic and reality. And indeed, they should flow from your hypothesis, the aims or specific questions you're asking, and the methods that you will use. We describe what you expect to find, and at the same time, take into account where you have limitations. So your anticipated outcomes or findings are not overstepping or overreaching. And it's very important at this point, especially to consider implications of your findings, both for science and society. Again, going back to the idea that the data that you are working with is donated graciously by our participants. And behind that data are human beings, and there are groups and communities, and they live in society. And so understanding the consequences of the research and the impact, both benefits and potential harms to those groups and communities and individuals is very important. And as you describe your outcomes and anticipated findings, taking these aspects into account will allow for a meaningful description. Next slide, please. Okay, so to summarize, after you have sort of gone through the process of writing a meaningful workspace description using the fields and prompts that you get in a workspace description form on the research workbench, here are some main things to take away. As we mentioned, remember these are publicly posted, and they are posted for several reasons, both to increase transparency to the public, but also to the participants whose data and generous contributions of data are enabling this research. So it's important to write it in a plain, accessible language that many people can understand. This means, defining complicated terms in terms of art, avoiding too many acronyms and abbreviations, seeing where you can avoid using technical jargon, but describe in a way that's easy for people to understand what you're planning to do and what the reasons why you want to do that research, and being aware of the potential of implicit biases. We all recognize that this might be what we call a challenging task. You have a limited amount of space and you're supposed to talk about your scientific research, but in a way that is still accessible. And so there is a sort of delicate dance that is being done here. So I want everyone to recognize here that you can always ask for help, especially the Resource Access Board is available for you if you need assistance, and so are members of the DRC. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you are writing a workspace and a description, you still have questions, there are means for you to get information assistance. Next slide, please. One of the sources is the Resource Access Board, which actually does provide oversight over data used by our Workbench users. And remember that the workspaces that are descriptions that are posted publicly can be flagged by a member of the public. And also that the Resource Access Board in itself conducts what we call auditing and monitoring of workspaces to make sure that users are using their data in compliance with the Data User Code of Conduct. The Resource Access Board, for those of you not familiar with it, oversees the compliance with the Data User Code of Conduct. And it also provides assistance and education to users. It's made up of members who bring a range of scientific, ethical, legal, and other expertise, and includes participant ambassadors to bring participant perspectives. And when you seek assistance from the Resource Access Board, it can provide you some suggestions and ideas to help you think about how you design your research, so you're preventing stigmatizing research, guide you in writing meaningful workspace descriptions, answer questions about the Data User Code of Conduct, and maybe as we will talk about it in future meetings or discussions and or in our question and answer sessions today, also help you think through about how to comply with the data and statistics dissemination policy of the program and when and how to seek exceptions if you need one. Next slide, please. And here I think we've shown you an example of your workspace description form in which you can see that there's a place where it says ask a question or report an issue. And that's one of the places where you can check if you would like to get assistance from the Resource Access Board in reviewing your research description. You click the Yes Radio button there and automatically a request is routed and the Resource Access Board can review your request and provide guidance. So hopefully this is a resource that you can also really leverage as you're writing meaningful workspace descriptions. Next slide, please. I think that was it. That was our presentation, and we're looking forward to your questions and thoughts. I'd like to thank Sonia and of course, Dr. Blazinski for getting us going and starting this discussion, and emphasize at the end of it that we expect or hope that by writing a meaningful workspace description, you have also sort of entered into that understanding that you serve as stewards of the data. Not only does the program serve as stewards of the data, but you, the users, also serve as stewards of the data that has been generously contributed by our participants and are doing so doing research to both benefit as many people as possible, but also not cause any harms to groups, communities, individuals, or families that are represented by the All of Us participants.